Grimm's Fairy Tales. The Three Golden Hairs, page 180. There was once a poor woman who had a son, of whom it was foretold that in his 14th year he should marry the king's daughter. At the time of his birth, it happened that the king passed through the village unknown to anyone, and he asked the news. He was told that a child had just been born, and it had been foretold that everything this child undertook would succeed, and that he would marry the king's daughter, when he was 14 years old. The king had a bad heart, and this prediction made him angry. He went to see the parents of the child and said in a friendly way, "You are poor people. Give me your child, I will take care of it." They refused at first, but the stranger offered them gold, and they said to each other, "As the child is born lucky, whatever happens will turn out well for him." So at last they consented to part with their son. The king put the child into a box and went down with his burden to the bank of a steep river, into which he threw it, thinking thus to rid his daughter of a suitor whom she hardly expected. But the box, instead of sinking, floated like a little boat, and not a drop of water found its way in. It floated down the stream till within 2 miles of the capital, and was stopped by the floodgates of a mill. The miller's boy, who happened to be there, saw it and pulled it towards him with a crook. He opened it expecting to find great treasure, but it was only a pretty little boy, brisk and handsome. He carried him to the mill. The miller and his wife, who had no children of their own, received this little one as if heavens had sent him. They treated the orphan in the best possible way, and he stayed with them and grew up hearty and strong and clever. One day the king, surprised by rain, entered the mill for shelter and asked the miller if this tall youth were his son. "No, your majesty," replied the miller. "He is a foundling who came in to our mill dam in a box 14 years ago. Our mill boy took him out of the water." Then the king knew it was the child he had thrown into the river. "Good people," said he, "could this youngster carry a letter from me to the queen? I would give him 2 pieces of gold for his pains." "As your majesty pleases," replied they, and told the young man to be ready. The king wrote a letter to the queen in which he told her to have the messenger put to death and buried, so that he might find the thing done when he came home. The youth set out with the letter, but lost his way, and at night found himself in the midst of a great forest. Through the darkness he descried in the distance a feeble light, and making his way in that direction, he came to a little hut where he saw the old woman sitting before the fire. She seemed surprised to see the young man and asked, "Whence come you, and what do you want?" "I come from the mill," he replied. "I'm carrying a letter to the Queen. I've lost my way and should be glad to pass the night here." "Unhappy youth," replied the woman, "you've fallen into a den of robbers. If they find you, your dream is sealed. With heaven's protection, I'm not afraid," said the youth. "Moreover, I'm so tired that I could possibly travel no further." He laid himself down on a bench and went to sleep. The robbers came in soon afterwards and angrily asked why the stranger was here. "Oh," said the old woman, "he's a poor boy who has lost his way in the wood, and I took him in out of compassion. He's carrying a letter to the Queen." The robbers took the letter and saw that it directed the Queen to have the messenger put to death. In spite of the hardness of their hearts, they felt compassion towards the poor young fellow. And the captain tore the letter up and substituted another for it, directing that as soon as the youth arrived, he should immediately marry the king's daughter. Then the robbers let him sleep on his bench till morning, and when he awoke, they gave him the letter and showed him his way. The Queen, when she received the letter, fulfilled the wishes therein. A splendid wedding was held. The king's daughter married the lucky youth, and as he was a handsome, good-natured young fellow, she was glad to live with him. So these are fairy tales. This is how it goes. Anyways. Sometime afterwards, the king came home to his palace to find the prediction accomplished, and the lucky youth married to his daughter. "How has this happened?" said he. "I'd given very different instructions in my letter." The Queen showed him the letter that he might see the contents. He read it and saw that his own letter had been taken away. He asked the youth, and what had become of the letter entrusted to him, and why he had delivered another instead. "I know nothing about it," said the youth. "It must have been changed during the night while I was asleep in the forest." The king said to him in anger, "This shall not pass thus. He who aspires to my daughter's hand must bring me from the underground cave 3 golden hairs from the greatest ogre's head. Bring these and my daughter shall be yours." The king said this in hope that he would never return from such a mission. The young man replied, "I'm not afraid of the ogre. I'll go and seek the 3 golden hairs." And he took leave of the king and set out on his journey. He came to a great town. At the gate, the sentinel asked him what was his trade and what he knew. "Everything," he replied. Then said the sentinel, "Do us the favor to tell us why the fountain of our marketplace, which used to run with wine, does not even give us water, but is dried up." "Wait," said he, "I'll tell you on my return." Further on, he came to another town. The sentinel at the gate asked who he was and what he knew. "Everything," he replied. "Then do us the favor to inform us why the great tree of our town, which used to bear golden apples, has now not even leaves." "Wait," said he, I'll tell you on my return. Farther on, he came to a great river where he had to cross. The ferryman asked him who he was and what he knew. Everything, replied he. Then said the ferryman, do me the kindness to inform me whether I'm always to stay at this post and never be relieved. Stop, he replied, I'll tell you on my return. On the further side of the water, he found the entrance to the ogre's cave. It was very black and smoky. The ogre was not at home. There was only his housekeeper sitting in a large armchair. What do you want? She asked in a sufficiently friendly voice. I want 3 golden hairs from the ogre's head, for without them I cannot have my wife. So, that's asking a great deal, she replied. If the ogre were to see you when he comes in, you've had a bad time. But I like your looks and will see what is to be done. She changed him into an ant and said, hide yourself in the folds of my dress. You will be in safety there. Thank you, said he. That will do famously. But I also want to know 3 things. Why does a fountain which used to run with wine not even yield water now? Second, why does a tree which used to give golden apples not have even leaves? And is a certain ferryman always to remain at his post without ever being relieved? Those are 3 difficult questions, she observed. But be very quiet and pay attention to what the ogre says when I pull out his 3 golden hairs. In the evening, the ogre came home. As soon as he entered, he noticed an extraordinary smell. There's something strange here, he said. I smell man's flesh. And he grubbed about in all corners without finding anything. The housekeeper began finding fault with him. I've just been sweeping and arranging the place, said she. And you put everything in disorder? You're always fancying you smell human flesh. Sit down and eat your supper. When he had supped, he was tired. He laid his head on his housekeeper's knees and told her to scratch his head for him. And he soon began to sleep and snore. Then the old woman seized a golden hair, pulled it out, and put it aside. Ha! Cried the ogre. What are you about? I had a bad dream, she replied, and that made me catch you by the hair. What did you dream? He asked. I dreamt that the fountain in the marketplace, which used to pour forth wine, had stopped and would not even give water. What can be the reason? Ah, if they knew that, replied the ogre. There's a toad under a stone in the fountain. If they would only kill that, the wine would begin to flow again. The housekeeper began to rub his head again, and he went to sleep and snored in such a manner that all the windows shook. Then she tore a second hair from his head. Oh, what are you about? Cried the ogre angrily. Don't put yourself out, she replied. It's only a dream I had. What have you been dreaming about? He asked. I dreamed that in a country there was a tree which always bore golden apples, and now it does not even bear leaves. What can be the reason? Ah, if they only knew, cried the ogre. There's a mouse gnawing the root. If they only killed it, the tree would bear apples again. But if the mouse goes on gnawing it, the tree will die altogether. Now leave me in peace with your dreams, and if you disturb me again, I will give you a box on your ears. The housekeeper quietened him and began to rub his head again till he was asleep and snoring. She seized the third golden hair and pulled it out. The ogre rose with a shout and was going to beat her. But she softened him up by saying, "Who can help having a bad dream?" "And what have you been dreaming now?" he asked curiously. "I dreamed that a ferryman was complaining that he was always keeping the ferry with his boat, and that no one ever came to relieve him." "Oh, the foolish fellow!" exclaimed the ogre. "He's only to put his oar into the hands of the first man who comes to pass the river, and then he'll be free, and the other will be obliged to act as ferryman in his turn." As the housekeeper had now pulled out the 3 golden hairs and extracted the 3 answers from the ogre, she left him in peace, and he slept till the morning. When the ogre had left the house, the old lady took the hairs out from the folds of her gown and restored the young man to his own shape. "These are the 3 hairs," she said. "But did you hear the answers the ogre gave to your questions?" "Very well," replied he, "and I shall remember them." "Then your turn is saved," said she, "and you can set out on your journey." He thanked the old lady who had given him such kind help and went out of the smoky cave very glad at having succeeded so well. When he came to the ferry, he caused the man to put him across before he told him the answer the ogre had taught him. Then he said, "You have only to put your oar into the hands of the first man who comes to pass the river." Further on, he came to the town of the sterile tree. The sentinel was also waiting for his answer. "Kill the mouse that is gnawing the root," said he, "and the golden apples will grow again." The sentinel, to reward him, gave him 2 asses laden with gold. At last he came to the city where the fountain was dry, and he said to the sentinel, there's a toad under a stone in the fountain. Look for it and kill it, and the wine will begin to flow again abundantly." The sentinel thanked him and also gave him 2 asses laden with gold. At last the lucky youth came to his wife, who rejoiced heartily to see him return and to hear that all had turned out well. He gave the ogres 3 golden hairs to the king. The king was highly satisfied when he saw the 4 asses laden with gold, and said to him, "Now all the conditions are fulfilled, and my daughter is yours. But tell me, my dear son-in-law, how you come by so much gold, for there's an immense treasure you bring back." "I found it," said he, "on the banks of a certain river I crossed. It's the sand of the shores there." "Could I get as much for myself?" asked the king, who was a miser. "As much as you like," he replied. "You'll find a ferryman, apply to him to pass the river, and you may fill your sacks." The covetous monarch immediately set out, and when he came to the river, made signs to the ferryman to bring over his boat. The ferryman took him across, and when they were at the other side, put his oar into the king's hand and jumped out. Thus the king became a ferryman as a punishment for his sins. And is he there still? Certainly, for nobody has taken the oar from him. So with that, we finish off this particular fairy tale.